So, what if I told you there's a hidden language that connects something like a chaotic abstract painting with, say, the collapse of a huge corporation? It's a language not made of words, but of simple shapes. And today, we're going to dive into how this visual vocabulary helps us find a little bit of order in some of the most complex, chaotic systems out there. All right, let's get into it. I mean, seriously, what's the common thread here? How can the emotional punch you get from a painting and the systemic rot in a failing business, how can they possibly be related? Well, the answer is a really powerful mental tool that changes not what you see, but how you see it. You see, it all comes down to what we're calling a language of shapes. Now, we're not talking about some mystical, artsy interpretation here. No, this is a structured, disciplined way to describe the relationships between things, whether those things are brushstrokes on a canvas or bullet points in a company's 5-year plan. And that brings us to the big idea, the constraint language. Now, don't get hung up on the name. It's not a language you speak, it's a language you think with. It's a deliberately simple, shared set of terms that lets us talk about incredibly complicated stuff with, honestly, surprising clarity. Okay, so it's super important to get what a constraint language isn't. This is not a model that claims to explain why something is happening. It doesn't deal in big universal truths. Instead, it's all about description. It focuses on how things are put together. Our source material calls it a stabilizing scaffold for our thoughts, not some rigid blueprint of reality. So how does this actually work? Let's start in a place you'd probably least expect to find this kind of rigid structure: the deeply personal, subjective world of abstract art. You know, the art critic Suzanne Crippen was wrestling with this exact problem. We've all done it. We look at a painting and say it feels angry or peaceful. But what are we actually seeing that makes us feel that way? How do we talk about it with something more concrete than just vague feelings? Crippen came up with a vocabulary of 5 descriptive primitives. First up is linearity. This is any element that kind of pulls your eye in a specific direction. Think of a strong, slashing diagonal line. It's the visual version of a forceful statement. It creates this real sense of purpose and direction. Next, we've got enclosure. This is all about how contained or open the shapes in the painting are. So a piece that has really high enclosure, where everything feels packed in and claustrophobic, well, that might give off a feeling of pressure or tension. It lets us talk about the painting's impact without having to play psychologist and guess what the artist was feeling. And on the flip side, you've got expansion. This is where the visual energy just seems to burst outwards, spreading across the whole canvas. And just like the others, this isn't good or bad on its own. It could feel like this incredible, joyful release, or it could feel like a complete and total loss of control. It all depends. And the last two that complete the set are repetition and disruption. Repetition, using the same shape or line over and over, can create a really powerful rhythm. Or if you overuse it, it can feel obsessive. And disruption is the exact opposite. A sudden break in a pattern that feels jarring and creates this visual sense of conflict. So look, the big takeaway here is that these 5 primitives, they don't give us some magic decoder ring for art. What they do is give us a shared, disciplined language to talk about how a painting creates its emotional effect. It's just a tool for a better, more precise conversation. Okay, now, let's take this whole idea and make a huge leap from the art gallery right into the boardroom. I know it seems like a stretch, but the exact same core idea of a constraint language can help us understand why complex systems, like businesses, break down. So for systems, our primitives are 4 different shapes. You've got the triangle, which is all about action, new ideas, moving forward. The circle, that's your communication, your feedback loops. The square provides the structure, the rules, the boundaries, the stuff that holds it all together. And finally, the spiral represents learning, evolution, and adaptation. And this, right here, is where the whole thing gets incredibly powerful. A healthy system, a resilient one, needs a good balance of all 4 of these shapes. The moment one shape starts to dominate, or one is completely missing, the system doesn't just fail randomly. It starts to break down in very predictable, very identifiable ways. All right, let's look at a classic failure mode: rigidity. This is what happens when an organization gets so stuck in its ways that it just can't change anymore. Think of that big, old company that just can't seem to innovate. So what's happening here structurally? Well, you've got way too much square. The system is all rules, all procedures, all structure. But it's totally missing the triangle. No new ideas, and it's missing the spiral, so there's no learning. The result? The whole system is just frozen in time, locked into its old ways, and slowly but surely becoming obsolete. Now let's look at the complete opposite problem:
uncontrolled expansion. This is that classic too many cooks in the kitchen chaos, where there's a ton of activity but no structure and it all just falls apart.
What does this look like in terms of shapes? Well, you've got plenty of triangles, new ideas popping up everywhere, and lots of circles. Everyone's talking, endless meetings, but there's not nearly enough square. Without that containment, without rules and boundaries, you just get a frenzy of activity with absolutely no accountability. It is a perfect recipe for burnout and total failure.
So let's pull all this together. What is the real power of thinking with a constraint language, whether you're analyzing a painting or a project plan? You know, this quote from the art paper really just nails it. In both worlds, this geometric language isn't the deep truth of the thing itself. It's that stabilizing scaffold. It's a simple framework we build around a messy problem to help us get a handle on it and see it more clearly.
And here's the beautiful paradox of it all. By deliberately limiting our vocabulary to just a few key shapes, we actually end up seeing more clearly. The constraints of the language itself filter out all the noise, and that allows the hidden patterns buried in the chaos to finally pop out. So why should you care about this? Well, first, it gives you a way to have clear, productive conversations about really complex subjective stuff. Second, it helps you diagnose problems at a structural level so you can see how something is broken, not just that it's broken. And finally, it's a fantastic reminder that sometimes limits and constraints are what give us clarity, not what holds us back. And that leaves us with one last question to think about. From the way your team works to how you manage your own finances, what other complicated part of your life could be made just a little bit clearer with a simple shared language of shapes?